Okay, in this Google Meet, we will be talking about Unit 2, Activity 4. And to summarize this activity, we'll be focusing on something called literary lenses, which are different perspectives or different ways that we can analyze stories. And so we need to enter Unit 2, Activity 4. And in the activity, you'll see that it starts with hopefully a thought-provoking quote, and it starts with trying to set up the idea that when different people read or watch, read a story or watch a movie, they will have different interpretations. They will analyze the movie or the story they've read differently based on their perspective, based on how they look at things. Okay, maybe based on their culture, based on their experiences, based on their age. All of this can change how we see a story. And so in this activity, we're going to look at 4 different what are called literary lenses. So 4 different ways to analyze a story using different perspectives. And those literary lenses are going to be the reading response lens, the historical biographical lens, the psychological lens, and the gender lens. I would expect you to have a general understanding of each of the 4 lenses. So say maybe on your final exam, I might ask or mention these lenses. But for the purposes of this activity, you're going to have to pick one of these lenses that you kind of like the best and use it in an assignment. Okay. So the reading response lens, this means that you as the reader bring your own experiences, your own emotions, your own background to your analysis. So you use your own personality to help you better understand the story. And so there are specific questions that you can use to help you analyze a story using the reader response lens. And I've given you some examples here. How do you feel about such and such that happened in the story? What does this make you think of? Like, can you think of when you're reading a story or watching a movie, what does it make you think of in your own life or your own real world experiences? So again, how does this relate to your own life? How might other people you know or other readers think differently about what's happening? What is the most important part of the story? What questions do you have about this the main character or the climax, right? And what would you ask the author if you could? So all of these questions are based on you as the reader. When you're reading, you're using your own thoughts and feelings to help you analyze and better understand the story. There's a little video here that you can watch that further explains the reader response theory. The second lens is called the historical or biographical lens. And this is where we use the life of the author or the time period in which the story or the movie was written or made in order to better understand the story. So if you're reading a story that takes place during World War II, that's a really important political, social, economic event that's going to have a dramatic impact on the story. So we use history and we use the author's own life to try to help us better understand the story. And so some questions that you can ask yourself if you're using this analysis is, to what extent is the writing style of the text typical for the time period? How do the language, characters, and events reflect when and where the author was writing? So what can we see in the actions of the characters, in the events, in the language that the characters are using that gives away and that shows us the time period in which the story was written or produced. Are there significant events in the author's life that are important to the text? Is the author using real life events to help him tell the story? What were the author's intentions when writing? Who is the intended audience? And then this is, for me, the most interesting one. What was happening politically, economically, and socially when the text was written? And you can do this for movies as well, too. What was happening politically, economically, or socially when the movie you're watching was made? That can help you analyze the story. Again, what we're doing here is we're looking at different perspectives, and we call them lenses, different perspectives to help you analyze a story. This video's no longer working here. I'll find another video and substitute for the historical biographical lens here. So if you want to take a look at a video. The next one is called the psychological lens, and this one's really interesting. We apply psychological ideas and theories to the story that we have watched or read. So the psychological lens views a text through the lens of psychology and psychoanalytic theory, focusing on the motivations, personalities, feelings, desires, impulses, and behavior of the characters. So when you're looking at a story psychologically, you're trying to ask, why is a character doing what he or she is doing? What are they thinking? Or what emotions are they feeling that are causing them to act in the way that they are acting? So you got Sigmund Freud here, and he obviously a very famous psychologist. And so what you're kind of trying to do is his idea of psychoanalysis, right? You're trying to use it and apply it to the story that you've read or watched. So if we take a look here, here are some questions you can ask when you're using a psychological analysis. What forces are motivating the characters in the story? What behaviors are conscious or maybe unconscious? Like, do you think the characters really understand why they're making the decisions that they're making? You've got this one is I'm not very good at answering this one here. But what roles do you think dreams have in the text? That might be specific to certain texts or movies. What do the characters' emotions reveal about their psychological states? What choices did the characters make? Were the choices moral or ethical? So in this type of analysis, we're kind of judging the characters and we're trying to identify whether what they're doing was right or wrong. And we're trying to identify their motivations. Why are they doing something? Are they doing something for selfish reasons? Are they doing something to help someone else? We're trying to look at the decision-making, the emotions, and the feelings of the characters. Okay? So these are some questions that you can answer to psychologically analyze a story. All right, and then the last one is gender lens. And so this lens looks at a story based on how people from across the gender spectrum are portrayed in society. So we look at gender representation, gender roles, and power dynamics, and how gender plays a role in that in the story. So some things you can ask yourself when you're analyzing a movie or a story from the gender lens is, what are the attitudes towards gender roles and identities in the story? Are these attitudes explicit or implicit? Do literary conventions, for example, the happy ending, reinforce or challenge gender stereotypes? What gender stereotypes are reinforced or questioned, which is kind of similar there. So are they reinforcing gender stereotypes in the story, or are they questioning them, or are they turning them on their head and completely reversing gender stereotypes? What assumptions are being made in the story about gender? And how does gender affect power dynamics. So the power relationships in the stories, the boss and the employee, the people that have power over each other in the story. How is gender portrayed in all of that? Again, this video is unavailable. I will find a new one, or I'll fix that link, and so you can take a look at a video if you like. But those are our four those are our four literary lenses. To give you an example, they look at kind of how you would analyze an apple as a really simple and kind of silly example. More specifically, though, we've got the story Cinderella that you can click on and you can read. This is the famous Cinderella story, the original Cinderella story from 1812. It's not quite the same as the Disney version of Cinderella. And so you can take a look, you can read the story, and then these are four questions for the reader response: the historical biographical lens, the psychological lens, and the gender lens. And then below, you can click and you can read analysis that answers these questions. So you can see a sample reader response analysis of Cinderella, a sample historical and biographical response, a sample psychological analysis, and a sample feminist or gender lens analysis. So you get a sample of each of the lenses and how they would interpret or analyze the story Cinderella. And that's it for the content. That's the lesson. Now we want to click on the assignment, and we want to take a look at what I'm going to ask you to do. And so I'm going to ask you, hopefully you've already looked at the Cinderella examples, and then I'm going to ask you to choose one of these three stories. They're all completely different. I tried to choose stories that would hopefully one of the three stories will grab your attention. The first one is like an action futuristic story where a man takes a time machine into the future to try to hunt and kill. Pardon me, I should get that mixed up. He takes a time machine into the past, I should say, to try to hunt and kill a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The second story is about a college student in India that meets a mysterious young woman on a train station, I should say, and it's kind of maybe a little bit of a romance story. And then the third one is about a Chinese American girl who becomes very good at chess, which is one of my favorite hobbies, which complicates her relationship with her mother. So this is more of a family story and about the relationship between a mother and a daughter. So whichever one of these grabs your attention, this one's more of a drama, this one's more of a romance, this one's more of an action story, just pick one. Okay. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is choose one of the four literary lenses. So reading response, historical biographical, psychological, or gender. So choose one of those four literary lenses covered in this activity and use it to analyze the short story that you read. So again, whichever one of these three you read, you're going to analyze it using one of the literary lenses. I'd like you to clearly identify the literary lens and the story that you have chosen so that there's no confusion. And then I'd like you to analyze the story using just three, using three of the four questions that I've provided you. So for example, if you're going to use the reader response lens to analyze rules of the game, then you're going to have to answer three out of these four questions and provide points and examples from this story to show your analysis. Or maybe you want to take the gender lens and you want to analyze the night train at Dioli through a gender lens. Actually, that one would go nicely together. Okay. So say you want to do the gender lens and you want to apply it to the night train at Dioli. Well, then you have to answer three of these four questions based on the night train to Dioli and provide supporting evidence from the story. Okay, so like if I take a look here, what are the attitudes towards gender roles and identities in the story? Well, what are the attitudes and the attitudes towards gender roles in The Night Train to Dioli, for example, right? So whichever three questions, and I've given you a little bit of choice. You don't have to answer all four for whichever lens you choose, but you do have to answer three out of the four. At the bottom here, you've just got a listing of the assignment requirements. I'm asking you to write approximately 12 sentences. I think it would take about 12 sentences to establish your topic and then answer three of the questions. Make sure you do give specific detail as supporting evidence from the story. So you're explaining your answer to these questions, but then you're providing evidence from the story. Okay. And of course, make sure you're using your own words, your own ideas. This is not a research assignment. I do need you to use only your own words and ideas. And please do not copy and paste into the Google Doc. I need to see you typing and editing directly in the Google Doc. And then this is the rubric that I'll use to grade your assignment. So you can take a look at that. And that's it for Unit 2, Activity 4, Literary Lenses. If you have any questions, please let me know.